What is love to a man who kills for power? That was the question whispered about Peter Park, the man everyone in Seoul's underworld called Silenzio. To his enemies, he was death wrapped in silence. To his men, he was loyalty bought with fear. And to himself, love was nothing but a weakness, a sharp knife that cut the heart of fools. Far from the glowing lights of Gangnam's skyscrapers, another story was unfolding. Susie, a young Nigerian woman, walked the crowded streets with her chest tight and her head heavy. Debt was eating her alive. Her rent was due, her landlord was banging on her door daily, and her creditors, the kind who carried knives, not papers, were hunting her down. To make it worse, her boyfriend, Kim Soo, had gambled away the little money her mother had sent from Busan. That money was meant for food, for survival, not to be lost in smoky gambling houses. Susie felt betrayed, abandoned, and completely alone. But she had one thing left: courage. And she would need it tonight. The rain started to fall as she walked through a narrow alleyway, her bag clutched close. Shadows moved around her, and suddenly, 4 men stepped out from the darkness. Their faces were rough, their eyes cruel. "Where's our money, Susie?" one growled. "You think you can run forever?" Her heart pounded, but her feet did not move. She lifted her chin, looked straight into their eyes, and spoke with a voice that did not shake. "I told you I will pay. Threats will not change what I don't have." The men laughed, closing in. One shoved her against the wall, his breath hot with alcohol. "We don't want promises. We want payment. Tonight." But Susie, even with fear clawing at her, refused to beg. She snapped back at them, in English, then Spanish, her words sharp and fearless. She cursed their threats, daring them to strike. What she did not know was that someone was watching. At the far end of the alley, leaning against a sleek black car, Peter Park had been observing quietly. His sharp eyes studied her every movement. He had seen countless people crumble before threats, but this girl stood tall. Her boldness lit something strange inside him, something he didn't like to name. With a simple wave of his hand, Peter's men moved in. The attackers froze when they recognized who had arrived. Silenzio, one of them stuttered, their confidence draining instantly. "You're making too much noise in my city," Peter said, his voice low, almost lazy, but deadly. "Leave. Now." The men scattered like rats, disappearing into the night. Silence returned to the alley, broken only by the sound of Susie's shaky breath. She turned, her eyes meeting Peter's for the first time. She saw a man dressed in black, his suit sharp, his gaze sharper. His presence was cold, dangerous, yet strangely magnetic. Peter stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "You speak Spanish?" Susie blinked, confused at the question. "Yes. I studied languages." "Why?" "Because from now on, you work for me," he replied without hesitation. "Translator. Secretary. You'll find out more tomorrow." Her mouth fell open. "What?" "I didn't ask for your help, and I don't need your job." Peter cut her off with a glare that froze her words. "You do. You just don't know it yet." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the rain, her heart pounding, her mind torn. Susie had no idea that this night would change her life forever. Because the man who believed love was for the weak had just met the woman who would break his silence. Susie could not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, sharp jaw, cold eyes, a man who commanded silence without raising his voice. Peter Park. Silenzio. Why had he stepped in for her? Why had he offered her a job she never asked for? His words echoed in her mind. "From now on, you work for me." By morning, her life already felt different. Her landlord had stopped banging on her door. The creditors who used to shadow her steps suddenly vanished from the streets near her home. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, but she knew better. That cloud had only shifted, and it was now resting on Peter Park. When the black car arrived outside her small apartment, she knew resisting was useless. 2 men in suits stood by the door. One of them spoke calmly. "Miss Susie, Mr. Park is waiting." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to shout at them to leave her alone. But something heavier pressed down on her, the truth. She had no money, no safety, and nowhere else to turn. With a deep breath, she stepped inside the car. The ride was silent, except for the hum of the city outside. Skyscrapers blurred past the tinted windows until they reached a tall building in Gangnam. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. It was a world far from her narrow streets. Peter Park was already waiting in his office. He sat behind a glass desk, his suit dark, his tie perfect, as if every detail of his life was sharpened like a blade. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I didn't even agree to come here," Susie snapped back, her boldness returning. At that, his eyes lifted, piercing into hers. For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, dangerous. Then, slowly, a corner of his mouth curved, not a smile, but something close. "You'll learn," he said softly. On the desk, files were spread open. Contracts written in Korean, Spanish, and Italian. Peter pushed one toward her. "Translate this." Susie hesitated, then sat down. Her eyes moved over the pages, her voice steady as she translated aloud, shifting from Spanish to Korean with ease. Peter leaned back, watching her. He noticed the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her words carried confidence. For the first time in years, something stirred inside him, interest. "Good," he finally said. "Better than I expected." She glared at him. "I'm not here to impress you." "Yet you did," he answered smoothly. The hours dragged into evening. Susie translated contracts, answered calls, and even sat silently through a tense meeting with two Colombian men who spoke only Spanish. They looked surprised to hear a foreign woman translate with such skill. Peter noticed their respect, and he noticed something else too. Their eyes lingered on Susie longer than they should. When the men finally left, Peter's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way they looked at her. He didn't like the way her presence pulled attention away from him. And he especially didn't like the way his own heart raced every time she looked back at him. "You'll stay late," he ordered suddenly. Susie frowned. "Why?" "The work is done." His voice was firm. "Because I said so. And because you need to understand something." She crossed her arms, defiant. "And what's that?" Peter leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "When you walk into my world, you don't leave unchanged. You belong here now, Susie. Whether you accept it or not." Her chest tightened. The words sounded like a warning, but deep inside, they felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. Susie never imagined her life would change so quickly. A week ago, she had been running from creditors, her nights filled with fear and shame. Now, she sat inside a luxury office tower, speaking Spanish, Italian, and Korean for a man who both terrified and confused her. Peter Park, Silenzio. He never smiled. He rarely raised his voice. Yet his presence filled every room. Men bowed when he entered. Enemies whispered his name like a curse. To Susie, he was still the stranger who had pulled her from an alley, but he was also something more. Something she couldn't explain. That morning, she arrived earlier than usual, determined not to give him another reason to snap at her. She wore a simple blouse and black skirt, her hair tied neatly back. She found him already at his desk, scanning reports, a cigarette burning slowly between his fingers. "You're learning," he said without glancing up. Susie frowned. "Learning what?" "To survive in my world," Peter replied, his tone flat. "Punctuality is the first rule." She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't his soldier. But instead, she bit her tongue. The truth was, she needed this job more than she wanted to admit. The day's work began with a meeting. Two men from Mexico entered, their voices loud, their laughter sharp. They greeted Peter in Spanish, and Susie stepped in smoothly, her tongue switching languages as if she'd been born with them. The Mexicans leaned toward her often, grinning too wide, complimenting her beauty as they spoke. Susie ignored it, keeping her eyes on the papers, translating word for word. But Peter noticed everything. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched. When the meeting ended, Peter dismissed the men with a curt nod. As soon as the door shut, he turned to Susie. "Next time," he said coldly, "you will not smile at them." Susie blinked, stunned. "What?" "I wasn't smiling." "You were," Peter insisted, his voice sharp. "And men like that, men who deal in blood and powder, they see a smile as invitation." Her eyes flashed. "So now you want to control how I breathe too?" For the first time, his composure cracked. Peter leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't test me, Susie. You don't understand what these men are capable of." She glared back, refusing to look away. And you do. Silence. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a long moment, the air between them burned. Something flickered, anger, yes, but also something else. Something heavier, sharper. Peter broke it first, leaning back in his chair. You'll work late again tonight. Of course, Susie muttered, her chest tight. The hours stretched. Contracts, phone calls, documents from Italy and Spain. Susie's head ached, but she kept going. She refused to show weakness in front of him. And as the night deepened, something strange happened. Their silences no longer felt heavy. Their arguments no longer felt like battles, they felt like sparks. At one point, she leaned over his desk to pass him a file, and their hands brushed. Just a fleeting touch, but enough to make her pulse race. She looked up, and his eyes were already on her. For once, they weren't cold. They were searching. Susie pulled her hand back quickly, pretending to focus on the papers. But her heart betrayed her, beating fast in her chest. Peter didn't say a word. But deep inside, he knew. For the first time in his life, something stronger than power had entered his world. And it was sitting right across from him. Susie thought she had buried the pain of Kim so long ago. He was the reason she had fallen into debt, the reason her landlord screamed at her door, the reason her mother's hard-earned money had vanished into smoke-filled gambling halls. She wanted to forget him. But betrayal has a way of finding its way back. It was late when she stepped out of Peter's office that night. The neon lights of Seoul painted the streets, and the air was heavy with mist. She walked fast, her bag tight against her shoulder. Then she saw him. Kim-soo. He was leaning against the wall near her apartment, his clothes messy, his eyes wild. Susie, he called softly, almost pleading. Her stomach twisted. What do you want? She asked, her voice sharp. I made mistakes, he said quickly, stepping closer. I lost money. I know. But I can change. I swear it. Just, give me another chance. Susie's eyes burned with anger. Another chance? You took the money my mother sent. You left me with nothing. Do you even know what I went through? Kim-soo reached out, trying to touch her hand, but she pulled back. Susie, I love you, he whispered. She laughed bitterly, though tears threatened her eyes. No. You love the game. You love the rush of gambling. You never loved me. For a moment, his face darkened. Then he leaned close, lowering his voice. You're different now. You think you're too good for me because you work for him? Susie stiffened. What do you mean? Kim-soo's jaw clenched. That man, Peter Park. Silenzio. Everyone knows who he is. He's dangerous, Susie. Stay away from him before he destroys you too. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the street. A tall shadow emerged from the mist. Peter Park. He had been watching. Kim-soo froze as Peter approached, his presence like ice slicing through the night. His men hung back, silent, but their eyes sharp. Who is this? Peter asked, his voice calm but deadly. Susie swallowed hard. No one. Kim-soo bristled. I'm her boyfriend. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Peter's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Slowly, he stepped closer until he stood only inches from Kim-soo. His voice dropped, quiet enough that only the three of them could hear. You had your chance, Peter said coldly. Now, you stay away. If I see you near her again, you won't walk away. Kim-soo's face paled. His bravado melted, and without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Susie stood frozen, her heart pounding. She turned to Peter, her voice unsteady. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Peter said firmly. His eyes softened, just for a moment. Men like him don't understand words. They only understand warnings. Susie looked away, her chest heavy with conflict. She should have been angry at Peter for interfering. She should have been afraid of the power he held. But instead, she felt something else, something she couldn't admit even to herself. Go home, Peter said at last, his voice quieter now. And lock your doors. As he turned and walked away, Susie realized her world had shifted again. Kim-soo's betrayal no longer haunted her. Something else was taking its place. Something far more dangerous. Because Peter Park, Silenzio, wasn't just her boss anymore. He was becoming her protector. And that terrified her more than anything. Susie told herself it was foolish. She was working for a mafia boss, not a man capable of love. Peter Park wasn't just her employer, he was Silenzio, the shadow that ruled Seoul's underworld. And yet, the more time she spent in his world, the harder it became to ignore the strange current pulling them together. The days grew longer, the nights even longer still. Susie found herself sitting across from Peter late into the evening, translating contracts from Colombia, decoding letters from Italy, her voice steady even when her hands trembled. Every glance, every silence between them, carried weight. One night, she caught him watching her. Not his usual sharp, calculating stare, but something else, something softer, hidden. It lasted only a second before he looked away, but it left her breathless. She tried to brush it off. She reminded herself of Kim Soo's betrayal, of the danger in Peter's world, of her own vow not to fall again. But desire has a way of chaining the heart. It snapped one evening when Susie made a mistake. She mistranslated a word in front of 2 Italian clients, a small slip born of exhaustion. The room went cold. The Italians exchanged suspicious looks. Peter's gaze cut to her, sharp as a knife. When the meeting ended, he dismissed everyone but her. The moment the door closed, his voice thundered. "Do you know what could have happened because of your mistake?" he shouted. "One word wrong, and deals fall apart. Lives are lost." Her eyes burned. "I'm human, Peter. I was tired. You work me until midnight and then expect me to be perfect." His anger flared. "Perfection is the only way to survive in my world." The silence that followed was heavy. Susie's chest rose and fell as she glared at him, refusing to back down. His eyes, dark and furious, locked onto hers. The tension between them was fire, rage and something more, something neither wanted to name. "Why do you keep me here, then?" she demanded, her voice trembling with both fury and something deeper. "If I'm such a risk, why not send me away?" Peter froze. His breath slowed, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he stepped closer. One step. Another. Until he stood so close she could feel the heat of him. "Because I can't," he whispered. Susie's lips parted, her heart racing. The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in. She wanted to move, to push him away, but her feet would not obey. His gaze dropped to her lips for the briefest moment, and her pulse hammered in her ears. But instead of touching her, he turned abruptly, walking toward the window. He lit a cigarette, the flame shaking ever so slightly. "You'll stay," he said after a long pause, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "But don't ever test me again." Susie stood frozen, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the truth she could no longer deny. The chains of desire were tightening, wrapping around her, binding her to him. And though Peter Park swore he did not believe in love, the way his voice had broken when he whispered "I can't" told her everything she wasn't ready to hear. The first sign that trouble was coming appeared on a quiet Tuesday night. Susie had just finished typing up translated reports when Peter's men burst into the office, their faces grim. They whispered something in his ear, and for the first time since she met him, she saw his jaw tighten with more than anger, it was worry. He dismissed his men and turned to her. "You're going home with an escort tonight." Susie frowned. "Why? I've gone home alone before." Peter's eyes narrowed. "Not anymore. Someone has been asking questions. About you." Her chest tightened. "Me? Why me?" "Because you work for me," he said coldly, though his voice carried something else beneath the steel. "That makes you a target." Susie's mind raced. She had stepped into his world without choice, but she never thought she'd become part of the danger. She wanted to argue, but Peter's tone left no room. For the first time, she realized how fragile the line was between his empire and her ordinary life. That night, as the car pulled up to her apartment, she noticed it, a shadow across the street. A man pretending to smoke, but his eyes never left her. Another stood by the corner, talking on a phone but glancing her way too often. Susie's breath quickened. She rushed upstairs, locking her door, but the fear lingered. She thought of calling her mother in Busan, of hearing her calm voice, but she didn't want to worry her. Instead, she sat in the dark, trembling. The next evening, she made a mistake. She insisted she could go home without the escort. Peter had been shouting at her all day, and she was tired of being ordered around like a child. She left the office late, walking quickly through the narrow streets. Halfway down an alley, footsteps echoed behind her. Then hands grabbed her. Pretty little translator, a voice sneered in Spanish. Silenzio's weakness. Her blood ran cold. 3 men surrounded her, their accents thick, their smirks cruel. One pulled at her bag, another grabbed her arm. But before panic could fully take her, a roar cut through the night. Let her go. Peter. He stepped out of the shadows with his men behind him. Guns glinted under the streetlights. His voice was low, deadly calm. You touched what's mine. Now you pay. The men froze, fear flashing in their eyes. One tried to protest, but Peter's men moved swiftly, disarming and pinning them to the ground. The alley filled with the sound of fists, groans, and boots on concrete. Susie stood frozen, her back against the wall, her heart pounding. She had never seen him like this, rage burning in every step, his control slipping. For the first time, she understood why the underworld whispered his name with fear. When it was over, Peter turned to her. His face was dark, his chest rising and falling fast. For a moment, he just stared at her, his eyes burning. Then, without warning, he grabbed her arm, not harshly, but firmly, pulling her close. Do you understand now? He hissed. This is why you listen. This is why you don't walk alone. Susie's voice shook. I didn't want you to control me. Peter's eyes softened, just slightly. It's not about control. It's about keeping you alive. Her breath caught. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. The cold Mafia boss who claimed love was weakness had let something slip, something fierce, protective, terrifying, and tender all at once. And as he held her in that dark alley, Susie realized the truth she had been fighting. Peter Park wasn't just her boss anymore. He was becoming the one man she couldn't walk away from. Susie hadn't stopped shaking since that night in the alley. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the men grabbing her, their sneers, their hands gripping her arms. But stronger than that memory was another, the way Peter had pulled her close, his voice shaking with anger and something else he didn't want to admit. 4 days, he barely spoke to her. He gave orders, signed contracts, and carried on with his work, but there was a tension in the air that wrapped around them like smoke. His men noticed it. Even the clients seemed to sense something unspoken between them. Susie tried to act normal. She translated documents, answered phone calls, and avoided his gaze. But the silence between them was heavy, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more it consumed her. On Friday night, the office was nearly empty. Only the glow of the city lights spilled through the tall glass windows. Susie was gathering her things when Peter's voice cut through the quiet. Stay. Her hands froze. Slowly, she turned to face him. He was standing by the window, looking out at the streets below, his back rigid. You could have been killed, he said without turning. His voice was low, raw. Do you understand that? Susie swallowed. I know. But I can't live my life in fear, Peter. I can't live locked in your cage. At that, he turned. His eyes burned with something fierce. It's not a cage. It's protection. My world doesn't forgive mistakes. Then maybe I shouldn't be in your world, she shot back, her voice trembling. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might shout. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout could. I can't let you go. Her breath caught. What? Peter's eyes locked onto hers. No masks, no walls, just the truth bleeding through. I told myself love was weakness. I told myself it made men blind. But when I saw those men touch you, when I thought of losing you, I realized I would burn this city to the ground before I let that happen. The words hit her like a storm. Her heart raced, her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was dangerous, that she couldn't trust him. But her body betrayed her, pulling her closer to him, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. Peter, she whispered, her voice breaking. This is crazy. You don't love. You don't even believe in it. He stepped closer still, until his face was only inches from hers. His voice was rough, almost pleading. Then tell me why I can't stop thinking about you. Tell me why every time you walk away, it feels like I'm losing more than I can stand. Her eyes blurred with tears. She had sworn never to fall again, never to let betrayal scar her heart a second time. And yet, standing here in the arms of a man who terrified the world, she felt safer than she ever had before. Slowly, almost against her will, she whispered, "Because you're not the man you think you are." For the first time in his life, Peter Park's walls cracked. He leaned closer, his lips brushing hers, not a command, not an order, but a question. A dangerous confession carried in a single touch. And Susie, trembling, couldn't turn away. The world around Peter Park was made of shadows and blood. He had built his empire on fear, convinced love was nothing but a weakness that destroyed men. But tonight, standing before Susie, he knew the truth. Love was the only thing keeping him alive. After their near kiss, Susie had pulled away, her heart racing, her mind torn. She couldn't deny what she felt, but fear still clung to her. Fear of betrayal, fear of the dangerous man she had fallen for. The storm broke 2 nights later. A rival gang struck, sending a warning meant for Peter, but it was Susie who almost paid the price. She had been walking home when 2 masked men tried to drag her into a van. Her scream cut through the night, but before they could take her, Peter arrived, fury burning in his eyes. The fight was brutal. His men swarmed, fists and steel clashing under the streetlights. But Peter didn't let his men handle it. He was the one who pulled Susie into his arms, shielding her with his body, daring anyone to touch her. When it was over, and the rivals were scattered or broken, Peter's chest heaved with rage. He turned to Susie, his hands gripping her shoulders tightly. "This is what happens," he said, his voice shaking. "This is what happens when they know you mean something to me. They'll keep coming. Again and again." Susie's eyes glistened. "Then let me go. If I'm your weakness, if I'm only going to be a target, let me go." For a long moment, Peter stared at her, the weight of his silence pressing down like thunder. And then, to her shock, he dropped to his knees. It wasn't weakness. It was surrender. "I can't," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard. "I thought love was for the weak. I thought I didn't need anyone. But you. Susie, you've already taken me apart. Without you, I'm nothing but silence." Her breath caught. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from the weight of his words.